I made my own wedding dress and my reception outfit, so let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Nabila. Welcome back to my channel. I'm really excited to make this video today because this is the kind of video that I would have wanted to watch when I was in the process of planning my own wedding and reception and designing these dresses. There are a ton of videos on YouTube of people designing and sewing their own traditional Western bridal dresses, but I really couldn't find the same type of video when it came to Desi bridal wear or South Asian outfits. Maybe because it's pretty common in our culture to take our outfits to the tailor to get professionally sewn, but I refuse to believe I'm the only South Asian girl on the planet to want to sew her own bridal outfit. So I really hope this video helps a person out there that is in the exact same position I was in. And even if you're not designing your own South Asian bridal outfit, I still think this video is going to be really entertaining because I'm going to be talking about all the technical aspects that I think us like-minded design freaks are really going to love. So just for some context, my husband and I had a pretty non-traditional wedding and reception, so these outfits might seem a little less extravagant when it comes to Desi standards. Even still, I think there are some really interesting design elements, especially when it came to designing the reception outfit, so I'm really excited to get into it. Also, my husband and I got married before I ever started posting on YouTube, so I don't have any entire clips, but I will show some of the video and pictures I took along the way. I also want to talk later on in this video about the most unexpected thing I had to sew for our wedding, and also at the end of this video I will quickly go over some of the other non-traditional things we did for our wedding in case it gives you some inspo, because I personally found it really hard to find non-traditional wedding inspo. So this might be a pretty lengthy video, so I'll leave some timestamps so you can skip around in this video and get what you need from it. Okay, with that all out of the way, let's get into talking about the first outfit, which is my wedding outfit. So for my wedding outfit, I wanted to go with a pretty traditional silhouette. I believe this is called an anarkali style. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if you are South Asian, and even if you're not, you've probably seen this type of South Asian outfit. It's really common and it usually is my favorite, and it's the type of outfit I tend to buy for myself. I really like how elegant it looks without trying too hard, and it's usually the type of design that's pretty forgiving when it comes to sizing, so it's meant to be a little loose and will fit you at different sizes pretty easily. Now, when it came to designing my wedding outfit, however, I really wanted to make sure the bodice was nice and snug, so we did have to put an invisible zipper down the center back to make sure I could get in and out of the garment. I'm saying we here actually because my mom and I designed my wedding outfit together. It was a pretty collaborative process, so I did the pattern making and sampling to get the bodice exactly right before I brought the fabric and pattern over to my mom to work on it. So in case you don't know, when you order a South Asian outfit online, typically they will ask you for your size so they can stitch it up for you, or you can ask them for just the fabric so you can take it into your tailor and get it all done to your exact measurements. And so in this case, when I ordered my outfit, I just put in no measurements so they would send me the fabric just by itself. And so with these South Asian outfits, they send you these beautiful embroidered panels basically. And when I was in design school, one thing my professors talked about was that when you're working with a really beautiful and complicated pattern or fabric, it's best to pick a pretty simple design so that you can really highlight that fabric, because a lot of style lines get lost if you try to do a lot of complicated design work. Because if you choose a design that is really complicated with a really complicated fabric, all of those style details kind of get lost and muddied basically. So that was another reason why I wanted to go with a pretty traditional silhouette. So when I was designing the bodice for the front portion, I really wanted to make sure that there were no darts because it was such a beautifully embroidered front panel. So I made sure to contour that pattern piece. Hi, it's Editing Nabila here. I explained this badly, so I want to try again. Contouring a pattern is when you adjust a pattern block to follow the body's natural contours for a tighter fit and no gapping. So in this case, I adjusted the side seam and the shoulder seams accordingly. There were some back darts in the princess seam, but the back was a solid color, so that was all good. And then again, like I said, there was an invisible zipper in the back. And another reason that was really great about having that invisible zipper in the back was when I had my hair and makeup done, I could actually just step into the dress to put it on. And that might seem kind of like an obvious thing if you're used to Western dresses, but a lot of Desi outfits are actually loose enough so you can pull them over your head. Even if they do have a zipper in the side, it's usually in like the armhole. So you do have to think about pulling it over your head, and that can be a problem when you have hair and makeup done. And that wasn't a problem in this case, so that was great. So like I said, once I figured out the bodice and the sleeves, I took that pattern and the fabric to my mom, and she helped me design the skirt, which was relatively easy, but then she also did the actual real sewing of my entire wedding outfit, which was incredible because I was really calm through this whole process, really because of her help. So going into the technical design of the skirt, it was really simple, but my mom and I didn't want to waste any of the fabric when it came to the skirt because we wanted to have the most full skirt we could. So because of that, there are two really small pleats on the front panel of the skirt, and you can't even really tell in the pictures, but it does add to the overall fullness. And then for the back, she just gathered a portion of the back panel just to give it a little bit more drama. For the front panel, you really couldn't do gathering because of that embroidered fabric. It just wouldn't look really nice and clean. So that's why in the back we could get away with doing those gathers because it was more or less plain back there. And then the part of this entire outfit that is my favorite is my mom had the idea to put horsehair braid in the hem of the skirt, and that just gave it so much more body and made the whole dress feel way more bridal in my opinion. And kind of the best part of that, honestly, is that my mom does bridal alteration. So this particular horsehair braid, which is usually pretty expensive, was actually free because it was from my mom's bridal alterations. And then one kind of special cherry on top idea that my mom had was we had a little bit of extra fabric from the bodice portion of the dress. So my mom decided that it would be a cute little detail to add it to the back, sort of like a belt almost with a snap closure. So the way I got into that dress is I would zip the back up and then snap that back portion into place. And it was also kind of nice because it hid that gathered seam. So it just made everything look a little bit more cohesive. It wasn't really necessary, honestly, but it was just a nice extra little detail. Okay, so my one regret with my bridal outfit, if I had to do it again, is that I actually hadn't put much thought into the fact that this dress, it needed to look really special from all angles. And this Desi outfit, like many others, was relatively plain in the back. So I wish I had thought of that so that I could have contacted the seller to sell me another skirt panel specifically, so I could just sew up basically two fronts of the skirt panel so that it had that beautiful embroidery in the back as well. And I think about that because a lot of the pictures from my wedding that show the back panel shows so much empty space, and it kind of bothers me, but at the same time, if I had done that, I guess the skirt wouldn't be as full, so you win some, you lose some, I guess. So in total, the fabric for this dress was $127, and for the labor, the pattern making and sampling of the bodice, I think took me about 2 weeks to get exactly right. And then actually my mom sewed up the whole dress in basically a weekend. So I would say this was actually a relatively fast project for my mom and I, but I should say she is a much more fast seamstress than I am. So take that timeline with a grain of salt. Okay, next it's time to talk about my reception outfit. So my wedding dress, like I said, was a very calm process. My reception outfit was not that, and that was mainly because I had to sew it all myself. My mom was not able to help me in this process. Also, our wedding and reception were 8 months apart, so I did have some time in between the two events to work on my reception dress separate from my wedding outfit. So my reception outfit took 5 weeks total to work on from start to finish. And actually, that was a longer amount of time than I expected to work on this outfit. So it was a little bit more complicated and involved. So for this design, I still wanted a relatively simple design to highlight the fabric. But in this case, I wanted a more Western Desi fusion look. And I was really inspired by this vintage Mugler collection. By the way, if you are in a crunch to design something quickly, but you don't know how to narrow down your ideas, I highly recommend looking at vintage runway patterns and actually translating something that is haute couture to a more casual look is a fun and interesting challenge, at least to me. I decided to design a simple tank top and skirt with the jacket being the star of the show. And actually, I originally wanted to have pants for this outfit, but I knew it was gonna be really hot since the reception was in August, and the skirt was also just easier to design quickly, so I pivoted for the sake of comfort and time. So this whole design process started out similar to my wedding look, where I just ordered the fabric from the seller and didn't put any measurements in and got sent just all the fabric uncut. But actually in this case, they had already stitched the skirt to a waistband and gathered it. So I didn't have to deal with that part of it. I just had to deal with the closure. I actually used the dupatta of the outfit to make most of the jacket. And then I had some extra fabric from the rest of the outfit to cut out my sleeves. So like I said, the jacket was the star of the show. It was 12 patterns that were cut along the princess seam lines for the front and back. And basically, I wanted to add in a kind of flouncy, like almost godet piece without actually adding a real godet in the jacket. So I added fullness strategically at the bottom half of each of those princess panels. And when it came time to cut these panels out, I actually spent a full day laying out the pattern pieces to make sure that everything lined up perfectly. So I'll go over the process for this really quick. But basically, I folded the dupatta in half, and I was kind of meticulous in pinning design details so that they were mirrored perfectly over each other. So I didn't have to think too hard about anything moving around while I was cutting. And then when I laid out the pattern pieces, I basically just measured out so that all those little wavy lines would match up. And I mostly matched them in the top portion because on the bottom portion of those patterns, those were cut on bias. So it was kind of hard to line up those perfectly anyway. And that's also not going to be as noticeable when you're wearing it. So the bottom portion wasn't really a priority when I was matching up those lines. I actually have a video I sent to my husband when I was sewing up this jacket because I was really excited by how it came out. So I'm going to play that here. Look at how this matches. Like all the way through. I'm so proud of that. So yeah, all of those princess seams, since it was like a netted fabric, I made sure to have those all be really clean French seams, and they're really, really tiny. I believe the seam allowance was like a 1/4 inch. And then to finish off the collar and the sleeves, I just used a gold ribbon as a bias binding to make sure those had a really clean and pretty finish. And the extra little detail that made it more like the vintage mugler is I took some fishing line and then I wrapped it around something and pressed it with some heat so it made it really, really curly. And then I took that and sewed a zigzag stitch along the hem of the jacket to encase the curly fishing line in the edge of that so that it had some structure and curled up and had this beautiful almost like ruffle detail to it. And I actually did the same to the skirt, but because the skirt was basically like a rectangle that was gathered up, it didn't have the extra flounce and structure that the jacket did, but I still think it was worth it to add that extra little detail. Honestly, if I had to go back, I would do the jacket exactly the same, but I kind of wish that I had designed an even simpler outfit to go underneath the jacket, like maybe just a simple dress so the jacket could even stand out even more than it did. And also, I think it would have saved me time because obviously I needed to sew a zipper into the skirt. And I think if I had designed the dress strategically, I might not have needed to take the time to sew in a closure. But at the end of the day, that jacket was a masterpiece. I still think that might be my favorite project I've ever worked on. And I kind of want to revisit that jacket design and make it in a more casual fabric so I could wear something similar in a more casual way. So all in all, for that reception outfit, I spent $100 on the fabric, and then like I said, the pattern making, the cutting, and the sewing took me about 5 weeks to make. Okay, let's go back to the wedding because I actually want to talk about one odd thing that I sewed for our wedding. So for the event, we wanted to cater velvet taco since that's something we ate a lot early in our relationship, and we were kind of struggling with how we were going to keep the food warm on the day of. So our venue was a historic building, so we couldn't have any of those catering flames to keep the food warm. The venue did have an oven, but we were a little bit worried about putting the cardboard velvet taco boxes into that oven because again, it's a historic building and we didn't really want to take any chances. So my husband and I were convinced that the best solution to our problem was to keep our tacos warm in an insulated bag, kind of like the ones that the pizza delivery guys have. But that was its own unique problem because velvet taco catering boxes come in a very unique size. So I literally scoured the internet and I could not find any insulated bags that were big enough for our velvet taco catering boxes. So I decided that I would just make one. So overall, it was a pretty simple project, but I just really wasn't expecting to make this. And I really couldn't find a tutorial for this online. So I put together some ideas from some lunchbox tutorials and came up with my design. I use thermal barrier fabric that has the shiny reflective side to help keep the heat in. And then I also used Insulbright, the insulating thermal lining fabric. And then on the outside, I just used a plain like nylon. So I had basically 3 layers of fabric, and actually I needed to adjust the pattern size since the layers got a little bit bulky. So the nylon was just a tiny bit bigger pattern-wise than the thermal barrier fabric. So I put the thermal barrier fabric on the inside and the Insulbright fabric on the outside. I'm actually not sure what the ideal layering situation would have been, but that's just what I did. And it actually did work. But then the heating for our venue actually went out and it was in the dead of winter. So the food got kind of cold anyway, but it was all fine. Okay, now I want to talk about all the things we did for our wedding that were pretty untraditional. So like I said, when we were planning the wedding, I was really struggling to find inspiration for truly untraditional weddings. I feel like when you look up stuff for untraditional weddings, you get like more eccentric things to add on to a traditional wedding and not a truly unique ceremony, if that makes sense. I think if you've never thought about it, you might actually be really surprised by how difficult it is to come up with a truly unique ceremony for a wedding. So one thing that helped us plan this wedding was I listened to this podcast where they were interviewing an author, Priya Parker, on her book, The Art of Gathering: How We Meet and Why It Matters. Now, full disclosure, I didn't get time to actually read the book. I'm sure it's great, but the interview itself gave me enough ideas on how to plan this wedding and make it meaningful for us. So my husband and I really solidified on our values and what we wanted to get out of this event. And we really wanted to keep it affordable because it really just didn't align with our values to spend so much money on one day. I know that's so normalized, especially in Desi cultures, and I'm not throwing shade at anyone. It's just for us, it just didn't feel right to spend so much money. So in order to keep costs low, we had a micro wedding which had less than 30 people. So especially by Desi standards, I think that's really untraditional. We also didn't have a bridal party. We didn't do a bachelorette party or a bachelor party or anything like that. That just didn't feel really important to us to spend our money on. I also really didn't want to be away from the party since I was an active participant in planning this whole thing. So I didn't want to walk down the aisle because that would require me to be hidden away somewhere for the beginning of the party. So instead, before our guests really arrived, we did a first look and we took some pictures with our photographer. And when guests arrived, I was already out and about ready to greet them when they came into our venue. We also wanted to write our own script for our ceremony. And actually my brother-in-law married us. And then we exchanged written vows, which I guess is pretty normal. I will say I'm noticing a trend in wedding culture where people are saying they're too shy to read their vows in front of their significant other and all their loved ones, which I totally get if you're having a big wedding, but I will say having a smaller wedding took the pressure off sort of in that sense. Also, I will say having a smaller wedding helped us not feel so stressed out when things maybe weren't running at the right schedule that we were intending. Then after the ceremony that we kind of created, We also sang a first song together, and then I sang a song that I had written for my husband, sort of as a surprise, except for my husband doesn't really like surprises, so I actually surprised him with it privately and then sang it for everyone at the ceremony. And then we didn't have a wedding cake. We actually just got our dessert from a dessert shop that meant a lot to us as a couple. And then for the decorations for our venue, instead of doing a bunch of pictures of us as a couple, we had pictures of ourselves that included each of our guests and a special memory with each of them and descriptions, so people could go around and read all those descriptions and know how they touched our lives. And yeah, overall, it was a really sweet evening. We didn't do a send-off or anything like that. Actually, my husband and I got changed into regular clothes so that we could help clean up the venue. And other than keeping the guest costs low, we also kept our flower cost low by doing the florals ourselves with flowers from Trader Joe's. And the people we rented the venue out from were really kind and let us decorate the venue the night before with all those flowers. I didn't have my own bouquet, I just had flowers on each of the tables. And I guess I kind of lucked out that it was winter, so the flowers kept together through the night really easily. And yeah, that was a really special day. And then for our reception, we only invited about 100 people, which again, for Desi standards, is pretty small. And the reception was more of just a party, so we weren't stressed about the event itself, but it was so fun to have everyone together and talk with everyone. To be honest, my husband and I were people who never really pictured our wedding when we were growing up. So it made it really easy for us to come up with an entirely new event. But I will say, after having those events, I actually do understand why weddings are so special. It's so nice to have everyone you love under one roof and have these special memories with people and kind of bring them in to your journey as a couple. So yeah, it was just perfect. I really am a huge advocate for doing whatever you want for your wedding. Even if it means that you don't invite me to your wedding, I want you to be happy. I know that I probably made some people upset by not inviting them to my wedding since it was a micro wedding, but really, when you follow your gut like that, you will just be so happy with the end results and have no regrets on the entire day. So I wish you the best in wedding planning. And if you're not wedding planning, I hope you have the best day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.